So I am super excited to introduce our speaker and hear about the thread that connects us all. Cesar Cardona is our guest speaker, and he's a public speaker who specializes in spirituality, psychology, and storytelling. He grew up split between Florida and New York and has lived in LA for the last 10 years. With a background in music and theater, he brings a unique and captivating approach to his presentations. Cesar was handpicked by renowned storyteller Rebecca Armstrong and has established himself as a powerful voice in the realm of public speaking. His mission is to connect people through shared stories and experiences, leaving a lasting impact on every audience he encounters. We're so excited to have you here, Cesar. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming.
Yes. Oh, great. Cool. As I said, thank you again for all being here. Your ears and your hearts, thanks for giving those to me. Thank you all on Zoom as well, watching. Where is the camera? Be there. Okay, good. I want to give a brief conversation about unity. When I open my phone, when I read the news, when I talk to people outside, I hear that we are more divided than ever. I hear that this is the worst of times. I hear it's us versus them. And I think we have more in common than what separates us. I know it makes sense for us naturally to want to be aware of the dangers out there in the world. Our ancestors did that. We looked across the Serengeti and we made sure whatever trouble, whatever predator was out there, we made sure our tribe was safe. But I think just beneath that, we have a fabric of familiarity that binds us together, that ties us together. And I wish to share that with you if I may. When I was a kid, I grew up in a really horrible childhood. Majority of my upbringing was divided between aggression, anger, violence, or isolation, abandonment, and feeling lonely. So rightfully so, I grew up in the middle of that, thinking that that's what was in the world. I always assumed that the isolation would be projected out into the world by people who understood the way the world worked, but they didn't tell anybody this, including me. So they'd go off and figure it out together, and I had to be left here on my own to figure out life. Or when I finally found people to be around, I thought I had to be that aggressive, dominant, egoic, had to dominate the situation and be tough. Pretty ironic though, because I was alone. I ended up being alone and isolating those people from me. So I was alone because I was scared to be alone. It's very depressing, of course. And I spent most of my life being depressed. I still suffer from depression now, but something illuminated my viewpoint on life. First thing first was finding Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. And I picked up a guitar, and I realized that this stringed instrument was a way that I could take the vulnerability that's within me, the darkness, the sorrow that's in here, and channel it into there, and then put it out into the world to bridge myself to the other world, to connect myself to the other world, to shorten the gap from myself to the other world. So I did that in the East Coast for a good while, and I played shows, I was on television, I won some singer-songwriter awards, it felt wonderful. But I still was plagued by these relics of memories of living in that place, of being this child here and looking at the world at this age, 4 years old, 5 years old, and saying, How come nobody loves me? Why can't I connect with people? Why does everybody leave? So I moved to Los Angeles, 3,000 miles away. I learned how to establish myself here. I wanted to give myself a brand that was bigger than who I was. And I was in theater, and I wrote, and I sang. And in the art of trying to learn about storytelling, I stumbled on this story here. Oh, there you go. That's the way to do it. So from going forward, I'm doing it this way. Got it. Okay. Thanks. This is Theseus and the Minotaur. It's a Greek myth. It's a story about a soldier from Crete who finds out he's the son of Poseidon. And in doing that, in realizing that, he sets out to accomplish these huge feats in the world. So he sails all the way to Athens, which, by the way, owns Crete. After hearing about this Minotaur that is in the center of this labyrinth, finds the king who runs and owns that labyrinth and Minotaur and says, "Sir, allow me to fight your Minotaur." King Minos goes, "Sure. You're not getting that. It's not a chance you're going to be able to do that. So you know what? I'll give you something lesser. You can't survive this one. Try that." Theseus does the challenge, he accomplishes the challenge, comes back to him and says, "Allow me to fight your Minotaur." King Minos picks on him again. No, I have something better for you. You're not going to be able to survive this one. Don't worry about this here. Of course, he does it. He accomplishes it. And he comes back to the king and says, "Allow me to fight your Minotaur." By this time, king says, "Fine, you got it. This is what you're going to do. You go in that labyrinth, and you stand in the center of that labyrinth, and you find that Minotaur is going to devour you. But if by some strange chance you manage to survive, good luck. Good luck getting out of the labyrinth, the dynamism of a maze, the complexity of a maze." Enter Ariadne. Ariadne is the king's daughter. She falls in love with Theseus, and she hands him a red thread and says, "Theseus, in the beginning of this labyrinth, you untie this thread as you go into this labyrinth. You enter the labyrinth, you find the center of that labyrinth. You find the Minotaur in that labyrinth, and you slay that Minotaur. And when you're done, take that thread and use it to connect you back to the external world. So you have this soldier going to the inner world and the outer world connected by way of a thread." I find out while reading this story that the thread name for it, this Greek myth, is a clue, C-L-E-W. And it's in that moment I realized, there we go. There's my band name, Cesar and the Clue. There's my LLC, One Clue LLC. Because symbols matter. When we go outside everywhere and we see marketing, logos, signs, street signs, we wear logos on our shirts. There's a chalice above us because symbols matter. They speak beyond the words, as beautiful as they are, that we communicate with. Heinrich Zimmer says that the best things are unexplainable. The second best things are misunderstood because they're used to try to explain the unexplainable. And the third best things are conversation. So why not symbols? Why not utilize the thing that really hits us at a silent level, but still connects us all? So it's in saying that Theseus goes into this labyrinth. In the center of this labyrinth, and he goes through the maze. Now, speaking symbolically, again, when I see this story, I see a circle. And when I see any circles or any maze or forest, it reminds me of Plato. Plato described the psyche as a circle, the way our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, our angers, our joys, they come up and they go back down. They come up and they go back down. So famous psychologist Carl Jung took that idea and made a circle. It's a simple circle, but it's one of my most favorite images because it's the representation of the human psyche. This entire circle here is every single psychological experience that you've had. The line that goes through it and above it is your consciousness. It's all the things you remember. And everything below it is your subconscious. It's where your dreams come from, where myths come from, where creativity comes from, inspiration comes from. We know myths are our public dreams, and your personal dreams are private myths. Carl Jung says the upper part of the line is the consciousness, which is like the iceberg you see above the ocean. And everything below that is the bigger iceberg, part of the iceberg that we don't see. I suppose our job is to not end up the Titanic. So we have up top here a square. For me, that was the most clever and most effective thing that we could have, because the square is the exact opposite of the round of that circle, the roundness of nature. It's the right angles in the squares that are man-made. As beneficial as they are, this building, for example, is beautiful. It's made of right angles and squares and rectangles. But if you go out in nature, it's got nothing to do with rectangles. So Jung puts those two ideas together and recognizes that that square is just a small part. But I think in doing that, this society that says we are more divided than ever is only resonating with that square without recognizing that you're the entirety of that circle. And your job as a self, capital S self, is to sit in the center of that circle. And what is in that center but a minotaur, a monster? The same monster we see in films and in myths, in our dreams, and on CNN, and anywhere you can find a monster that's projected externally. But that's only half the story, because I find out the etymological breakdown of the word monster is Latin, of monstrum. It means divine omen. The divinity that's everywhere. That is a Proto-Indo-European derivative of Monet. It means to make think. And that is a derivative of the term monir, which means to remind. So the etymological structure of the word itself, of a monster, is to remind you to think about the divinity out there and in here. There's your clue right there. Because the monster you're looking for, or you're worried about, sometimes is the one that's in here. And it's your job to amalgamate with that monster, because just behind that is the best version of yourself. I'm reminded of, every time I see this word, I'm reminded of Star Wars. If there's any Star Wars fans in here. I thought I heard you clap, actually. In the Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker is going through a forest. He's dreaming this, by the way, another psychological phenomenon. He's dreaming going through this forest, trying to find his way through like a maze. He finds Darth Vader with his lightsaber. He cuts his head off, excuse me. And Darth Vader's head rolls to his feet. And when he does, he looks inside the helmet and sees his own face. There's your monster. Before you go out there and take on the ones that are out here, it's time to settle the monster that lays within here. So Theseus does that. He slays that minotaur. And with that thread given to him by Ariadne, he comes back out. And Ariadne, as we know, as every story we have, is the goddess energy, the feminine energy, the archetype of the goddess who gives life. I mean, after all, we call it Mother Nature. It's the world navel. The woman energy is the one that gives life to all of us. And just the same way Ariadne gives him that thread to get out of the labyrinth is the same exact Ariadne used in the movie Inception. Christopher Nolan has this character who has to break into people's dreams. In order for him to map the psyche, he uses a character who can map it, and he names her Ariadne. So we have an ancient myth and something that came out 15 years ago using the same exact symbol. The Greeks and the Norse, they have this story here of these three women who at the beginning of our lives, they open up a thread, string. And when they determine the end of your life is where they cut it. These women in the Greek myths are called the fates. So your fate is determined by the clues of your life. It's right there in front of us. We have to just see through the physical part of it. So I go through that and I find all of that revelation. And I ask myself, where else in the world are they? Where else can I find these clues, lack of a better term, lack of the term? And first thing I do is I go to myself as a Buddhist. We have doctrines, text from the Buddha that we call sutras. The Heart Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, the Karma Sutra, and a bunch of others. The word sutra itself is Sanskrit to suture together, to tie. So we have the Buddha speaking words about all of us being the manifestation of Buddha consciousness in every text. And we know we are that as Buddhists because every New Year's we go to a temple, we all take a string, one string, we hold it together, we meditate that's tied to the illumination of the Buddha up top here, because we are that manifestation. And then two, because if one of us moves with that string in our hands, everybody else will feel it. There's a word for that. The word for what you do has effect. Karma. One of the definitions of karma is fruitive action. It means the action you have has fruit. It bears the fruit that holds the seed of life. That's an implication that the entire world is based on this thread that turns in and out. And this reminds me of Indra's net. This is in Hinduism. It's the realization of an infinite net that's tied to these small jewels and gems. Metaphor, by the way. But it's the realization that when you look in one of those gems, it reflects every other gem. It reflects every other reflecting thing that's near it. And of course, that one reflects the ones around it as well. My friends, when I realize this, I now see it in every single one of you. I see your mother, your father. I see your hopes, your dreams. I see the person you don't want to be, the person you want to be, and the person you are right here and now. And like those jewels, every single one of you are precious. That's the realization. That's what we should hold on to. We're tied by this human experience here. That's the similarity. And then you can take the same theme and go all the way over to the Atlantic Ocean and find the white Apache tribe that has a story of the old woman who weaves the world. Completely disconnected from India. This old woman, it sits at the edge of the earth, and she threads and stitches all that we see in this world. And then she gets a little tired, she takes a rest, and the thread comes apart little by little. And that's what we call calamity. Disasters, war, and so on and so forth. And staying in the West, since we've already went ancient, Eastern, and now Western contemporary, we go to the Christian and Judaism belief, where this is from the Old Testament of Judah and Tamar. Tamar has twins, and upon birth, the first child extends his hand out of her womb. The midwife sees this, and around his wrist, she ties a red thread. He recoils his hand, pulls it back in. The second child comes out. They name that child Pharez, which means to breach. The child with the thread around his wrist, they name him Zerah. So Tamar, which means the Hebrew date tree, the tree of life, gives birth to Zerah, which means dawn and sunshine, to dawn a new light. And a child named Pharez, to breach through. So giving life to something that breaks through in a new age. And this is their practice in the Old Testament. And Pharez is mentioned in the New Testament and tied directly to Jesus of Nazareth. The thread just sits here, quietly waiting for us to stumble upon it. And that influences everything. And by Christian belief and by Jesus of Nazareth, he says that everything is one under God. Beethoven even does that himself. He takes the Western music, which a lot of it is comprised of the church and Bach putting it together, and writes the Ninth Symphony. And the Ninth Symphony is the ode to joy that says, in words from a poem by Anton Schindler, we are all one in humanity under source. He does that with a symphony, an orchestra, instruments that are covered in strings. And when they're played, the next person plays, and the next person plays. And they reflect off each other just like those net of gems. And we feel that. And I can show you logically how to write a symphony, but I can't explain to you why it does to you what It does. Why it compels you. And we use music like this to activate us in the world and let us know that we can go and see that Minotaur, our own version of it. And it makes me personally not scared, because I know just behind my fear, behind my anger about the world, is the best version of me waiting to be found. And I challenge the same to everybody in this world. Find your cave. The one that scares you the most, that's where your best version of you hides behind. When I found that, I realized how much I matter. And that makes me realize how much you matter. And ultimately, we are made of matter, which breaks down to molecules, atoms, neutrons. And inside those neutrons, from a scientific standpoint, there are these lines, these squiggly lines that connect every single one of us, because we're all made of matter. And that practice is called string theory. So we have an ancient belief, we have a religious belief, contemporary music, and the scientific that are using symbols to realize the thing beyond words that connect us all, whether we can see it or not. That lets me know that we are not just a temporary wave. We are all the ocean. And it's up to us to make that determination when the tide comes in and comes back out. That same tide that's connected to the moon, that goes around the earth, that goes around the sun. And we use that sun to make a determination on time. And we know time is relative thanks to this man, who, by chance, says that there is a superior mind that reveals itself in the world of the experience, the human experience. So the question is, looking at historically, we've used these symbols, and there's so many other of them, but this one hit me the most, that speak about how well tied together we are in this world. How else do we go about the world other than kind, compassionate, unified? Once that revealed itself to me, and because this child lives with me every day, living in my life, and I feel that connected with you, this child is no longer alone. He's here with every single one of you. Thank you for your time.